But basically, in Colonel Summers Park, I'll just give you just a quick synopsis. A few years ago, people started calling and complaining about what was going on in the park. The valid complaints were, noise after park closing that's keeping people from being able to sleep, or, dangerous physical confrontations like somebody getting into a fight. Now, I had been going to that park and hanging out for several years before these phone calls were being made. Back then, to me, it was like the perfect anarchist utopia. It was like this beautiful autonomous zone where you could go and hang out and be yourself, do what you wanted to. There weren't a bunch of cops policing people, and everything seemed fine to me. And, I wasn't there every single day, but I was there many days of the week throughout the summer. And there might have been once or twice I saw a cop car come out because somebody drank too much and got into a fight. Okay? And as far as I know, all the reasonable complaints from neighbors have revolved around mostly noise after park closing. Most of the neighbors, as far as I know, don't even care if people get into a fight, because as long as they're not in a fight, who cares,
Yeah, as long as it's contained.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, and, of course, people want to be able to take their kids and play on the playground and stuff, but, I never saw people who, I always see, like, the playground and the area, there's plenty of kids in the park with their parents all the time. And there might be a houseless person nearby, or there might be some, punk or hippie kids, playing, hula hoop or fire spinning or whatever, but everything's fine. It's a very cool, hip park. But a couple years ago, suddenly there started to be a bunch of phone calls and a bunch of park rangers started coming out. And I'm like, why are you guys doing this? And they said, we want to make sure people have fun appropriately in the park, and that the police were tired of dealing with the phone calls. So I'm like, okay, well, whatever. So we were willing to endure this policing for a whole summer season, and then they went away, and then they came back this summer, and they're doing the same thing this summer. Now, it's a lot of complicated details, a lot of ins and outs, to quote some cool movies, but anyway, right. A lot of ins and outs, but basically, Parks and Rec came out. They wanted to shut down the pavilion, where Food Not Bombs serves food most of the year, because in Portland it rains most of the year, and so we serve under the pavilion most of the year. So gating off the pavilion would keep us from being able to serve food to people for free. Anyway, Parks and Rec came out. They claimed that they were having a meeting in the park so people could participate, but they weren't talking to anybody from Food Not Bombs, and we were like, just 20, 30, 40, maybe 50 feet away, like right in front of the pavilion, because in the summertime we serve out, in the sun where it's nice. But one of our people overheard, and then when I came up, I got there kind of late, and she told me, hey, they're having this meeting over here, you should go check it out. So I went over and I talked to one of the people who was the community engagement manager for Parks and Rec, and she says, oh, I've got this survey, and I looked at it, and it had a list of changes they wanted to make to the park, and one of them was getting off the pavilion, and she said she was getting contact information, so I gave her my email address, and my other friend gave her email address as well. And I wrote an email to the city council person who was in charge of the parks department, and immediately there started to be a change in the way that the park was being policed. They dramatically reduced the number of park rangers, and I believe the reason they did that was because they didn't want us to think that that they weren't going to bother us anymore, and that we didn't need to do anything. We could just go back to being apathetic. But of course, I'm not going to go back to being apathetic. And so then we found out from somebody secondhand that they were having a meeting at Hinson Baptist Church, okay, which is like on the next block next to the park. And that the meeting was at the exact same time as we served for Food Not Bombs. And we had provided our email addresses to be notified of the meeting, and they didn't notify us. So it's like they're trying to keep it a secret. Now, they claim that they're not trying to keep it a secret, and they claim they went around and told people in the park, but I actually went around and told everyone in the park, and nobody even knew about it. And so they actually didn't do a very good job telling folks in the park. And they have the staff, because they send park rangers around to every single group in the park to question them about alcohol or what's in their bags or what's in their containers. And so if they can do that, they can pass out flyers to tell folks, hey, we're going to have a meeting to talk about the park. But they don't consider the people in the park to be of the same class as them. We're not equal human beings as them. they can just oppress us or treat us like second-class citizens with impunity. And of course, that's what they're doing. We found out about the meeting, and we decided to serve Food Not Bombs there. We canceled our regular serving. Food Not Bombs went in and kind of ambushed the meeting. We took it over, and we made it a very clear point that we were against getting the pavilion. We were against the way that the park was being managed with all the policing. We actually served a bunch of food there. I would say we were like half the people there at the meeting. The other half was like people who lived in the neighborhood, and I would say of those neighbors, half of them were against making changes, and half of them were for making changes. And after that meeting, one of the folks came up to me, and I guess I'll say her name, and if we decide later, we can edit it out. But her name was Ashley, and she said that looks like that you're on the opposite side of this issue from me. She was someone at the meeting that didn't want to be videoed. Remember that? And she was also in the meeting she was for gating the pavilion. Anyway, we had a good conversation. And so I contacted the community engagement manager, that's Elizabeth from Parks and Rec, and said, hey, I talked to this person Ashley at the meeting. I'm sure you got her contact info and her email address. If you email her, if you forward my email to her, let her know that I want to meet with her and see if I can make her feel safer, living next to the park and going to the park with her kids. So very shortly afterwards, she came to Food Not Bomb. She sat down with us. She had some like vegan ice cream sorbet that we had made. She said she would get in touch with me. So then a few weeks later, she emailed me. In the email, she said something very interesting. That she said that she was the person who proposed the idea for gating the pavilion. Which to me was kind of shocking because I thought, well, Parks and Rec had gated a pavilion over in Powell Park 5 years previously. So I just figured that, if she proposed that she was the one who wanted to gate the pavilion, that they somehow put the idea in her head, okay? Otherwise, that means it's, a spontaneous generation of a police state monument by the collective unconscious of the privileged class. Yep. Okay, that's the only way to explain it. Anyway, her and I had a meeting, and I spent a long time telling her about my past so that she could get to know me, and she told me about her past so I could get to know her. And then later in the conversation, I did ask her about this. How did she propose this? Was the idea put into her head? And she said, in fact, that she drove past the Powell Park, saw the pavilion, and then said, oh, that's a good idea. If we just gate it off, then the houseless folks can't sit under the pavilion. People can't do scary things under there that that I think are bad. Some of the things that she talked about was hard drug use, or coarse language or garbage or things like this. And so I said, well, hard drug use, are you talking about people using needles or smoking crack or doing lines of cocaine? Like, what kind of hard drug use are you talking about? And she says, well, people are smoking out of like glass pipes or metal pipes. And I'm like, so do you mean like marijuana? Like, I know some people that have like, pipes they've made out of like tin foil or maybe cans or whatever, but they're not smoking hard drugs. They're just smoking pot. Pot's not a hard drug. Marijuana's not a hard drug. And she said, well, I don't want my kids around that. So I thought, she sounds like a very conservative person. So when we were having a conversation later, part of what we shared was our religious background. I grew up Southern Baptist and was saved in the church at a very young age when I was 9 years old. I went to a private Baptist Christian church the whole way up. I used to read and study the Bible on my own. I would go to Sunday school and sing in the choir. So I know all about that. Now, I renounced my faith when I was 25 years old because it didn't match up with my sexuality. And I decided that I couldn't go with any other Christian denomination because I'd been raised one way and I was taught that, being gay is wrong and that you're going to hell, and I couldn't just go and be Episcopalian or something like this, Right. I was Baptist and that was it, so I needed to go look at Buddhism or something else, but I couldn't be Christian anymore. So anyway, that's, that was my spiritual background, and but she was raised Catholic, but then she became Baptist, she became evangelical and became born again. And I clearly understood that probably was why that she felt so uncomfortable living next to the park, because I mean, this park is like Sodom and Gomorrah. I mean, it's queer people everywhere. So there's a lot of gay people in the park, and there's a lot of homeless people in the park, and there's a lot of punk kids, and they're, maybe they're smoking pot or drinking some beer sometimes, and but definitely people who you wouldn't see, wearing collar shirts and ties and going to church. It's just, it's the opposite of that, and this is right in front of her window. So I can understand why it made her feel uncomfortable to have to live and see that for such a long time. I mean, not a long time, because she's only been living at the park for 2 years. She's been living there at the park, as a neighbor, for less time than I've been going there for Food Not Bombs. So in our conversation, what was interesting, and I'm going to go back to the part about her proposal to gate the pavilion. Okay, so she did, in fact, she told me that she emailed Parks and Rec to gate the pavilion with that idea and her list of complaints and why she thought it should be gated. 2 months before the survey was done. Okay, the survey that was not very well circulated and only given to people who had made complaints. Okay, right. So she did actually give them the idea, in a sense, although she got the idea from them because she saw that they had already done it at a different park. Okay, just a simple, you can call it a comedy of errors or whatever, but basically that's how it went down. And it's highly unlikely I would have done anything. I probably would have still, just been enduring the park rangers, until, you do something that's going to shut down Food Not Bombs, and then now I've got to take I've got to take action. I can't. I've got to do something until you stop threatening us. So she did tell me that, but that's not the most interesting thing that she told me. The most interesting thing that she told me was that the people. Okay, so Hinson Baptist Church owns a lot of. This is what she told me. Owns a lot of properties on that block. Okay, and on the adjacent blocks. And
wait, I'm sorry. The church actually owns.
The church owns the properties.
The church owns the properties.
The church owns the properties. A church that is tax exempt and is supposed to be nonprofit owns property around it, and I guess they're renting the property out to different people, and I'm sure that that's legal in some way. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. But what they've been doing in the last couple years, since all these calls have been starting, and all the park rangers have been coming out, is as people have been leaving these properties, okay, they've been getting people from their own congregation to go in. Okay, now I don't know if they're doing that legally. I don't know if they're using all the fair housing practices that they're supposed to use when you're going to rent a house, you're going to sell a house to somebody. If you're a nonprofit, do you have to put it out publicly? Like, I don't know, and I'm going to contact a lawyer, maybe run it past them to see what they think. But that's when all the calls started. So here you got basically this church, Hinson Baptist Church, which is supposed to be a Christian church and following the teachings of Jesus Christ. And I know those teachings because I grew up with them. And it's love God first, and then love your neighbor second. It literally says your neighbor. Right. So here they are, engaged in real estate, basically, getting their own people into these houses, and then using their class privilege to oppress economically underprivileged people who are unhoused. And one thing that she told me was that we're trying to make this a nice community and a nice neighborhood, and I said, well, there's not just, it's not just housed people who make up the community in the neighborhood. There's unhoused people too, and there's people who live just a few blocks away that aren't just on this block next to the park that use the park, you need to include all these people in your community. And I said that what I would like to do is to talk with your pastor. And she said, well, that should be pretty easy because my husband's the pastor. Of course,
how convenient.
Right?
Yeah,
of course. And actually, they have 3 pastors, and 2 of them are out right now. And so her husband is the one who's leading the sermons and stuff, I guess. And she also told me that in one of his recent sermons that he said that they needed to make sure that they were including everyone in the community. So maybe he is becoming consciously aware of this, but I'm sure they're only becoming consciously aware of this because we're making them consciously aware of it. I actually know of somebody who sent them an email saying that what they were doing was unchristian. and he doesn't even know the details of what I just told you about them specifically owning properties. What he was criticizing was the fact that the meeting was being held in secret within their church. And that was unchristian on its own. So now you look at the rest of this whole, they're supposed to be practicing Christianity, but they're practicing capitalism.
Yeah, they're being elitist.
Yeah, they're being elitist, and and it's like what I told her was that it's great that you have a literal interpretation of the Bible, but I said that what I tend to find is that when people interpret the Bible too literally, to a fault, that they become fundamentalist. What ends up happening is they lose the symbolic teaching. And the symbolic teaching is where the spiritual teaching comes from. And, the word Christian means Christ-like, okay? So that means like Jesus Christ. So that the focus of what you want to look at is the 4 Gospels, okay? Because that's what we have. We may have some more texts, but those are the ones that are commonly accepted, right? And if you go in there, Jesus is not talking about sin. He says to stop sinning, okay, but he's not talking about these specific sins. He spends more time criticizing people who are always, legalistically trying to define sin and punish and exclude people or stone them or whatever. Mary Magdalene was the whore, right? And they wanted to stone her, and so he goes on the sand and writes down all their sins, and then they have to put their stones down and walk away, the message of Jesus is to love one another,
right,
and to help each other.
Yeah.
It's not to judge others. Even like if you get outside of that teaching, you go to the Apostle Paul and you go to the Book of Romans and you talk about homosexuality, and a host of other sins. Okay, drinking or warmongering or whoremongering or whatever. Like all the sins. It's funny. The verses in the chapters they use to condemn homosexuals. It's like this long laundry list of sins, okay? And it says, yes, of course, if you do all these things, you're going to hell. Very next verse, very next chapter says, but if you judge people, you're even worse than these people that commit these sins. But they don't ever talk about that. And all they do is judge, So it's not, they're not even following their own teachings, And so, it actually, it's no surprise that a fundamentalist Baptist church that interprets the Bible in a way that they think is literal, okay, would be very hypocritical in this regard and just be practicing capitalism, not be practicing Christianity at all. The city has this program where they let churches, and I don't know much about this. I know they tried it, like within the last several years. They may still be doing it. I know that the Quakers are doing it, but they let people camp like in their backyards or like in their parking lots, maybe like park their cars in the parking lot at night and sleep, so people have a safe place to sleep. I think there's a program that churches could participate. So this is the kind of thing, like if Hinson Baptist Church is bothered by the homeless people that are living in the park, okay, maybe they should go there and try to help them and offer them safe places, if they really believe that the message of Jesus Christ is going to help them change their lives, that you could talk to these people, okay? But instead, they're just calling the cops.
Yeah.
And they're not casting stones because the cops don't carry stones. They carry guns with bullets. So Hinson Baptist Church is the first one to call the cops and not throw stones, but be willing to threaten to shoot bullets. Because that's what cops do, basically, is you either do what they say, or they arrest you, or they tase you, or they shoot you.
Yep.
So it's a threat of violence, and so that's what these people are doing.
Something that might be worth looking into or whatever is seeing what this church does specifically for underprivileged people within their community. You know what I mean? We're discussing what they are doing against them, but it would be interesting to see if they do anything at all for them, or if they just only serve the people that go to their congregation.
Yeah, and she did tell me that they're involved in a charity program where they take donated items and they share them, and it's like out in Gresham, and they drive way out there and they do this, and it's like okay, we'll just compare that to you want to make a better community, okay? So you're driving out to Gresham to share free stuff, okay? That's fine, whatever, I want to reduce consumption and have people live as frugally as possible and not have to go work jobs that are hurting the environment or supporting war or whatever, So that's great, but you're not doing anything in the community. They participate in the Buckman picnic, that's nice, but there's people right there that could certainly use some help, and they're just calling the cops on them. and wanting to gate them and shove them out of the pavilion. So, I don't think that Jesus Christ would say, hey, let's gate up this pavilion and kick the homeless out. But he might walk into Hinson Baptist Church with a whip and whip them out. You know what I mean? Because that's what he did. He went in with a whip and he whipped out the money changers, people that were practicing capitalism. And they're practicing capitalism. So that's kind of the way that I see it. Food Not Bombs, for instance, what we're doing is we are, being consciously aware of ourselves and the world around us and how we can make the world a better place and not do harm. And so, we do our entire serving by bike. We don't use fossil fuels because we see the connection between fossil fuels, environmental destruction, and war, okay? For the last many decades, there's been war over fossil fuels, especially in the Middle East. Now, those wars are still going on. They started off covertly with drones, but now they're so overt that everybody knows about it. But there's not any kind of like big wars like Iraq, fighting over oil. But now the battlefront for fossil fuels is now, the Alberta tar sands, where they want to destroy the environment there. They want to destroy our water by piping it over our water and having and it leaking out. They want to be able to frack everywhere. So it's like, all these stages of fossil fuels in moving towards the peak of fossil fuels, we're going through that. We're fighting these resource wars, and now we're, destroying our own environment, all over the planet with CO2, but also like right in our own backyards. And so this is why, we take personal responsibility, and we realize, hey, if it's wrong to do this, then, hey, we'll stop doing it. We'll stop using cars, and we'll do everything by bike and trailer. Many of us, we don't work in jobs that we feel like is going to, hurt the environment or support war. We don't want to engage in consumption. Okay, a lot of energy goes into producing cheap, crappy products that nobody uses. You know what I mean? They use them, but they break and they just end up in a landfill. A huge amount of energy being produced or being consumed to do that. So we don't participate in that. A lot of us, we don't buy food that comes in packaging. We do lots of things. We actually put our values into practice. We buy organic. We buy as local as possible. We try to eat as much out of the waste stream as possible. And we try to make sure that all of our efforts are going to serve those that are in need, not those who don't have needs. If you look at our economy, most people in our economy is working for someone who actually has more than them. Okay, so you're working for someone, that already has their needs met better than you, and you're going to meet their needs more? Like, it doesn't make any sense. And then they're doing the same thing, and then you get to the top where somebody's just so, grotesquely wealthy. It's just like, why are we working to make this person richer? This person has their needs met. It doesn't make any sense. We should be working for the people who don't have their needs met. So we're working for those people. Those people are our bosses, okay? So that's why, when we serve people out east of 82nd, those people are our bosses, okay? People who are camping out in front of City Hall, that are advocating for their rights, the houseless, those people are our bosses, okay? We do what they tell us to do, okay? Maybe not directly, but we go there and we serve them with what we feel like is the best thing for them. And, but everybody else in the economy is trying to help somebody who's richer. So, going back to this, situation with Hinson Baptist Church and the message of Jesus Christ and loving your neighbor and loving one another, we're doing that. We're practicing that, okay? And they're not, okay? But they're using the word Christian and we're not, okay? When I go downtown to the occupation and I see the signs, I see all these messages about love and loving one another and spirituality and praying for each other. Like, I see real Christianity, and yeah, they might be engaged in some petty sins like drinking or smoking pot or having premarital sex or whatever, okay, these little fundamentalist sins, right, but they're actually, practicing love towards one another. They're sharing with each other. They're helping each other, okay? So that's the real thing. Those are the top two commandments, okay? Not all these other little small ones. But the people over at Hinson Baptist Church are worried about these little small ones, and they're practicing capitalism, and they're not loving their neighbor. So I don't know if they've got an attorney or they've been, consulting with an attorney in regards to all their real estate practices and all their phone calls with the police and stuff. But I know for certain that if they believe in God, or if there is a God and they believe in this God, then they're not consulting with this God. Right. They're not consulting with that person, because they wouldn't be doing what they're doing if they were consulting with God. Mm-hmm. So anyway, my theory is that these people, like I said, they aren't real Christians. They're using force to oppress other people, and they're only going to respond to other people using force against them. Not necessarily violent force, but basically like when we had the meeting at Hinson Baptist Church, we forced them to, to recognize us, that we had unequal say, because we showed up in force. We showed up with a large number of people. And if we hadn't have shown up, they would have just moved forward and done whatever they wanted to. So I don't believe this whole, Christian spirituality thing that they're talking about. I think they're fake. And I think the truth is that they only are working with us because we are forcing them to.